The first time I remember thinking about time as a young child was while watching the film Alice in Wonderland. While Alice sleepily stares into the water, she's interrupted by the White Rabbit. He's all dressed up, carrying a pocket watch, and he sings, I'm late for a very important date. No time to say hello, goodbye, I'm late. He runs past, and Alice says, what could a rabbit possibly be late for? And that's where the story begins. If a rabbit feels pressed for time, where does that leave the rest of us? For me, the concept of time brings about simultaneous feelings of panic and awe. If Alice were to have the ability to read my mind, she might hear an inner monologue that goes a little something like this, in no particular order. "4 months to do this TED Talk, 18 minutes or less, time to synthesize, time to research, time to write it all down, time to get fit, time to lose weight, time to get married, forever, ever, time to have a baby, time to grab a coffee, time to make the donuts, time to come in on the weekend, time to book a trip, forget that cancer trip, vampire weekend. Though we live on the US dollar, you and me, we got our own sense of time," or something like that. As you can see from that deep dive down my own personal rabbit hole, our experiences of time are unique to us and multifaceted, yet they all bear the hallmarks of life as we know it. So, come with me on a journey through time where things get curious and curiouser. My own fascination with time stems from many things, but most recently it's come from learning how to play the drums. Since I was 11 years old, I've played the trumpet, and for the past 12 years, I've played in a 17-piece big band. When COVID hit and the pandemic began, and associated lockdowns occurred, our band was no longer able to rehearse in person. So our music director had a bright idea. Let's teach them all how to drum. So we distributed some drumsticks, and we learned how to drum over Zoom in the middle of the long, cold, and interminable Canadian winter. And it was in that strange experience of learning flams, paradiddles, and other rudiments of drumming that I started thinking a lot about time. In particular, I started thinking about time as a space between 2 points. In order to play the drums more quickly and to keep up with the beating metronome, you have to decrease the space between the drumstick and the drum. And while that sounds really simple, I promise it really isn't. It was quite the contrary. And in those moments, that space in between becomes increasingly important. It's that in-between space that I'd like you to focus on. Because once I started thinking about time in this way, I couldn't stop. I started thinking about my task-filled, jumbled mind. And just like Alice, I typically think 6 impossible things before breakfast, time, and these impossible things were everywhere. Imagine my consternation when I set out to research all of this, and the first words, literally, that I read were that time was a human construct, that it was an illusion, and that it doesn't exist. Take a moment to think about that, but only a moment, because we haven't got the time. If time doesn't exist, then what the heck was I talking about? What we do know is that time permeates our existence, and it's perplexed humans for centuries. Most of us have been fooled into thinking that time flows uniformly in one direction from past to the future. Instead, it might surprise you to learn that time doesn't really work that way. A clock on the floor, for example, runs more slowly than one that's placed on the table. Time passes faster in the mountains than it does at sea level. And people age faster or slower, depending on where they're located. Einstein's revolutionary theory of general relativity showed us that we were all wrong about the chronological way of thinking about time, and that time can even slow or bend or speed up, depending on vantage point and gravity. This is otherwise known as space-time. If we dig even deeper, as J.J. Thomson did in 1897, we discover that at the subatomic level, time is chaotic and unpredictable, not at all uniform. And some scientists believe that this provides a theoretical blueprint for time travel. The physics of time is absolutely mind-blowing. Think black holes, quarks, and Stephen Hawking phenomena. But they don't bring us any closer to understanding our human way of experiencing time. The physicist Carlo Rovelli observed that humans are only able to perceive a very narrow subset of aspects of the universe, and it's this experience that is rooted in time. In this way, time is not so much a characteristic of the flow of the universe, and instead is a beautiful aspect of our existence as humans. As Ravelli puts it, the study of time inexorably brings us back to the study of ourselves. And what can be said of us? Well, first and foremost, our lives relative to the universal flow of time are startlingly and frustratingly short. We've solved lots of problems, we haven't yet solved that one. Further, if we're lucky enough to even be born, we're each allotted 24 hours a day. Despite having these things in common, you might have noticed the ways in which people experience time quite differently from one another. For example, some of us are hardwired to put more emphasis on the past than the present, to think more about the future than the past, and so on. Those who are more present-oriented have been found to live life more hedonistically, more dangerously. They consume more drugs, they get more speeding tickets, and they generally take more risks. As I began to appreciate the ways in which we experience time differently, I started asking friends, family, and colleagues about their own thoughts on time. Not surprisingly, responses varied. One colleague told me he had a tortured relationship with time. This is borne out in the research, and I experienced this at times. Hateful jobs and long-distance relationships came to mind. Others said their lives were ruled by time. I went to see my hairstylist. I asked her about her thoughts on time, and she said, time is trippy. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you know how for the past 10 years, you show up 5 minutes early? And I said, mm-hmm. And she said, well, for the past 10 years, I have other clients who show up 10 minutes late. And when they do, they're so pleased with themselves as though they're perfectly on time. Another good friend of mine, as he gets older, said he starts to contemplate the end of his life, and it's finally dawning on him that time is in short supply. He said he could already feel himself lying on his deathbed, saying, why the hell did you spend so much time doing dentistry? Which brings me to lawyering. Seeing as this TED Talk has a target audience of in-house counsel, it bears mentioning that in my view, we relate differently to time. We bill time on the 6-minute increment. Our careers can be over if we miss a drop-dead date. I'm exaggerating, but only slightly. And ultimately, we're in the business of selling our legal skills and time. Time is of the essence of this agreement. A 2020 survey of in-house counsel in Canada showed that 71% were facing increased stress and anxiety. A further 61% said that they had more accountability, ethics, compliance, investigations, ESG, and the demand for legal services was growing. In my view, these stats only serve to illustrate the ways in which we need to continue to strive to protect the limited pockets of time we have, to carve out the time to think through problems, and to continue to strive to balance out our careers with our broader lives. As I get older and life becomes increasingly more hectic, I must work harder at carving out time to do the things that I'm truly passionate about. I'm convinced that this makes me a better lawyer, mother, daughter, sibling, etc. As mentioned with the drumming, my own life and perception of time has been significantly influenced by sports and music. Musicians are used to breaking down time in ways that I believe are useful to other facets of our lives. As I mentioned earlier, I've played the trumpet for several years. When you go to play a single note on the trumpet, there are many well-timed steps that lead up to it. You lick your lips to form a seal. You set your embouchure. You place it on the mouthpiece. You press down the valves. You take a deep and well-proportioned breath that corresponds to the note that you're seeking to play. You might use your tongue or not to lend shape to a note. And then you blow, presto, with just the right amount of air and force. Assuming you're not doing this by yourself, you have to do it in tandem with everyone else, failing which you cack a note or play when no one else is. Comic timing. It's worth noting that music is the form of art that's most in tune with time. Even listening to music allows the listener to surf between the past, the present, and the future, and between quantifiable minutes and seconds. There's a predictive quality to music which causes us to be able to future tell, so we can predict a note that's coming after one that we've already heard. A drummer I know said he's obsessed with time. It turns out this is a pretty normal statement in that drumming actually alters one's brain. Drummers are used to perceiving time at the micro level and to breaking down time into discrete units. In drummers' brains, fibers connecting the two hemispheres become thicker and motor areas become increasingly efficient. More generally, studies have shown that music actually hijacks our brains and our everyday perception of time. More drinks are sold in bars where slow music plays, causing patrons to linger and experience enjoyment. Similarly, shoppers were found to spend 38% more in grocery stores where the music is slower. In 2004, Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries was deemed to be the most dangerous song to drive to by the UK Royal Automobile Club. Other dangerous driving tunes include Mr. Brightside by the Killers and Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. Despite the seemingly mechanistic and true nature of musical time, it's interesting to consider the ways in which composers tell musicians how to play a piece. In particular, the directives that they give to musicians around the tempo of a piece are actually very unclear and ambiguous. Adagietto, fairly slow. Largissimo, slower than slow. Allegro, mano troppo, fast, but not too fast. And tempo rubato, otherwise known as rob time, where time is stolen from one beat and added to another. Although I've grappled with mentioning his name, a musician that I think has a keen sense of musical timing was Michael Jackson. In the film This Is It, he can be seen to be repeatedly lecturing the band to let the moment simmer, otherwise to leave space between the notes. At one point he basically loses it and he says to them, "Just bathe in the moonlight." I've always thought this represents a useful philosophy, not only in music, but also in life. The same goes for sports. When I was 7 years old, I started swimming competitively. By the time I was 16, I was spending 20 plus hours in the pool, 9 practices a week, plus swim meets. In competitive swimming, every effort is spent tweaking all facets: finger positioning, flip turns, kick, breathing, the dive off the start block, head positioning, and body roll, all to tweak 1/10 of a second off your previous best time. Although the research is still lacking, elite athletes like Wayne Gretzky report being able to slow down their own perception in real time. It's thought that this happens because they've spent so much time receiving repetitive feedback and they turn this into advanced muscle memory. As an adult and at a less elite level, I understand that increasing cadence and shortening the space between 2 points will help me pedal up a steep section on my mountain bike, or that leaning into a downward hill will cause gravity to cause me to run faster. In this way, playing with and manipulating time and space to my own advantage. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the pandemic and how this has altered our conception of time. When last March hit, my own feelings, and I'm sure those of many others, were ones of shock and dread. In some ways, I contemplated whether time and our existence would cease altogether. It turns out I wasn't alone. The pandemic truly has been altering our perception of time. In one study, people were all over the map. 20% reported time was passing in the usual way, whereas the other 80% were saying time was passing more slowly or more quickly. What can be said is that the pandemic has robbed us of the usual temporal markers that we had in place prior. When this happens, time can be experienced as passing more slowly or make us feel like we're stuck in the present. Some have termed a new day of the week Blur's Day, something I'm sure we'll all understand having worked from home for this long. Another assessment is that time slows for people who believe they're in mortal peril. I read that a caveman who's about to be attacked by a lion is more likely to save himself if he thinks he's got more time to do so. So, to wrap this all up and to give you some time back, I will leave you with this. I strongly believe that time is our most valuable resource. Time is essential to our humanity, and ultimately we get to decide how we spend it. I think that if each of us were to examine our own lives through our own lenses and experiences, we would discover ways in which we're not using time to its fullest potential. Spaces where we're not fully appreciating time, or where we're not even aware that it's passing. Even for those of you who obsess with time, have you taken a step back, taken a deep breath, and just let a moment simmer? Just bathed in the moonlight? I hope that by showing you the ways in which time is not one-directional and uniform, you're able to see that our experiences of time are perception-based and deeply personal, formed by the memories that we make and by our anticipation of the future. As we age, and hopefully our 4,000 weeks accumulate, time starts to speed up. Put another way, our perception of things around us gets more fuzzy and our ability to perceive things slows down. Ultimately, time is more malleable, fluid, and ever-changing than we think. I also hope that by considering the ways in which you break down and use your time, you're able to find the spaces in between that can be used in whichever way you like, to be more or less productive, as it were. The choice is yours, mostly. So how do we slow down the passing of time and live more mindfully today? I can only speak from personal experience on this one and share with you my own secret sauce of building in new experiences that bring me joy, spending time in nature, and connecting with those who I love. Achieving a state of flow, as it were, I've found that traumatic experiences can make time stop. Not something I recommend seeking out if you can help it. And that getting lost in nature or in a beautiful piece of music is the best way to forget about time altogether. Further, if I can say one thing, it's to not ignore your passions. Our jobs can be fulfilling, challenging, and meaningful. That said, they don't have to be our be-all, end-all. Explore your interests and make space for new ones. Doing so has been scientifically proven to cause you to look back in the rearview mirror of life and to view your life as having been richer and more fulfilling. If nothing else, I hope the pandemic has taught us that time is precious, and that in turn we come to appreciate the little moments a bit more. To savor the pockets of time, to consciously choose how we spend our days, to treat one another with kindness, and to prioritize the things that we might have previously overlooked. To take risks and to enjoy the present. To step outside of our comfort zones and to dive headfirst down the proverbial rabbit hole in search of a more full life. If time doesn't ultimately exist, then who cares if we're late? After all, each day is a gift and anything can happen.